It's DUG24. 24 hours, 24 sessions, 24 speakers, 100% Microsoft Dynamics. It's unparalleled, unprecedented, and undeniable fun with your hosts Beau and Bobby Small. Let's get into it with another episode of DUG24.
Holy moly, we made it. It's zone 3. I've been at this since 6 a.m. Mountain Time, which means I'm in hour 16, I guess. We're just starting this third block up. Super excited to be here with everybody joining us for this next block as we cross over. It's kind of weird because you're crossing way over and then kind of back into EMEA. So we're just kind of sunsetting or sun rising with Fredrik where he is and across the land there. I'm not going to spend too much time. I'm going to let Fredrik introduce himself and get started with our time zone number 3 keynote. But so happy to have you with us. We've got 8 great sessions coming up. Sit back, relax, enjoy. Use the chat for questions and take it away, Fredrik.
Yes, thank you so much, guys, and welcome to the EMEA session. Everybody's joining in. I'm so happy to be asked to do this. I've been a part of the community for a while, and I got stoked when I saw this 24-hour user group session online, and I was lucky enough to get a spot. And what do you talk about when you get in a keynote position and to kind of start this off? One of the things I've been doing lately, Bobby, especially from my point of view, is playing around with a lot of AI and trying to see what works, what sticks, and what you can do. And what I've seen, I see a lot of posts on LinkedIn that kind of miss the mark on what the complexity of AI can be. It seems like it's thrown into one big bucket, and then everybody's comparing those things. And there's a lot of complexity in this. So I'm trying to, in this session, we'll try to unpack some of that and look into what different tooling we have, because I think we get stuck in some of the mindsets of building agents or doing co-pilots. But I want to kind of open your mind to what different capabilities there are in our toolbox that we can use in this. So I've come up with this term, which I call it's not a good term. I've been getting a lot of flack for this. I'm calling it vibing, from the vibe coding stuff. But we're kind of going beyond just coding, and I'll show you how to do that and what kind of the premise of that is. So I'm Fredrik Sætre. I'm a part of the global black belt team. Sounds kind of ominous, but we basically then go in as a black belt and then help the sales teams perform better. So I do a lot of advising to the sales teams around the EMEA sector and time statement here in Microsoft. And we're probably helping customers getting started on this journey, but also helping our sales team to kind of perform better, and partners, of course. So what we're going to do is try to understand what webbing is. So we'll start off with that. And then we're going in and we're going to do some comparison with what agents and Copilot and how it kind of compares to that. And then I'm going to show you kind of my experience going through this and some of my use cases that I've been playing around with. And we'll talk a bit about that we're moving, in fact, beyond the scope of agents. And then the core takeaways at the end. Beau, did you have something to say? I saw your hand went up. Or did you just like a virtual high five me?
It was on accident. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let me start off with kind of unpacking what I thought of the agents or AI was doing. And when I started kind of unpacking it, it made a lot of sense for the users I was talking to. So we always kind of get into AI through this user front end. So a lot of this happens through chatbots. And we were presented with this welcome message when you start up this application. Now, at the back end, there's an application runtime. So underneath the hood, and it can be any type of application run. This could be ChatGPT, it could be Copilot Studio, and in this case, I'll think about this as Copilot Studio. That kind of runs everything for you, kind of the arbiter of the session that you're working on, and it has text that's written into this, and there's a lot of information coming in. So all of these solutions or runtimes have a system prompt that tells it what's the personality of it, how it's going to work, how it's going to do things, and a lot of the information about how the actual application runtime consumes messages from the LLM and then does something. Either it feeds you a message back into the user interface, or it performs some type of action in the back end. And I don't think we think about these things too much when we're working with the agent. So what's actually happening underneath the hood? And you can do a lot of configurations. And I'll talk a bit about this when we get to kind of the vibing stuff, but just in the Copilot Studio sense, this is everything that you do from the setup side. So you have a lot of power to do this. You can't do anything with the system message. That's kind of how the system works. But then you can set up the configuration. What tools do you have? What's the kind of the information? What's the triggers? What's the topics that you want to do? There's a lot of information you can put into it. And then what you do after you set this up, of course, you send your first message back to it. And this is kind of where it all starts. So you send over, like, find some information for me. And then it takes all of this information, takes the system prompts, the configuration, and then your prompt, and then it sends it over to the large language model. And it gets back a bunch of information. And in this case, it needs more data. So if you ask it to find some information, this is where we kind of came away from just using the core information in the models. First ChatGPT, we only talked to the core model. And then we started doing something called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation, or grounding. We called it in Microsoft, where it basically goes out and then it sends a system command like, I need more data. So it's going to call some type of API, pull in data, and then it's going to send all of that back into the LLM. And that's when you get the response. And that's what it put back to you. Like, here's the answer to the question. Same thing with agents, right? If you want to ask it to do something, right, begins to do some type of tooling, and we add it to the complexity of it. And then you send that back into the system. It takes all of this information, passes it on to the LLM, and then it sends back some information. These are the tokens that we're talking about. So when you see some of the tokenomics that we're doing, all of this, the more that you add to this, the more it's going to cost for every single call that you're doing to the LLM. And then you get some system message back. Now, the prompt and the system prompts and the architecture in here in the application runtime says that because in this response that you get from the LLM, it says we need to use some type of tool to do perform some type of action. It does that action, calls this tool, and it can be an API or something. It sends back some type of result from the API. And then again, the architecture of the application runtime sends this large package of text to the LLM again, and then you get a response. And that pops back up. So you see only kind of a fraction of what the LLM is actually using and all of the information that's going through this. And if you look at this, there's two things that you have to kind of worry about or think about for the quality of the session that you're using. First off, this thing right here is the session. So every time you work on something, the kind of the session scope grows and grows and grows. And I see this done in a lot of the demos that we do. We forget that we're still in the same session. So you ask a question again, you just continue on the same session. All of this information on the top is going to be passed on to the LLM. This is why you want to do a new session, a fresh session when you want to do it. It also incurs, if you're paying for all the tokens, it will impact the cost of the tokens or the questions that you're doing. So the quality of the session and the context is very key. And I think context is probably the kind of carrying keyword, because the quality of everything that you're doing is based on the context that you can give an LLM to do this. So the RAG and the ability to pull in data and the quality of that data, which is greatly improved with Work IQ, by the way, that is very important. So how good is the data that we give the context when we want to send to the LLM for the session that you're working on? So these two things, I think we have to really, really think about these things. Now, this brings me to kind of the topic and my aha moment when I worked through this. So working with LLMs and working with information like this, I was going to prep some demos. So I did a lot of kind of use case demos. And for every single demo that I did, I started out with building and setting up the ERP to be able to run some type of process. And then it kind of hit me. Well, what if I just asked the agent to set up and configure the things that I want? And I started off with just setting up a customer or doing these things, and it's kind of the standard demo. And then I wanted to kind of see how far I can take that journey. And so what I did, I just posted an image like this where I set up here's the bill of material. I need to do the demo that I'm doing because I wanted to go into production. So I needed to create all of this. But instead of going in and kind of entering all of this information, there's a lot of data that has to be put in. There's a lot of clicks and forms and putting data into these text boxes. I went in and just did a very simple prompt. So I said, build me a BOM for this. And then I just put in the image. And it started to kind of understand it. And you're seeing I'm working here with Copilot Studio. So it kind of gave me a setup of what I wanted to build. And then it started actually deploying it. And here you see kind of the result of this. So I thought, well, there's more to this. It has to be more to this. How far can I actually take this? And this is where my dawning of the let's say the vibe config came to pass, because what I was kind of stuck in the mindset was I want to do something, right? I'm doing these things. I'm prompting it to create a sales order or do a very limited set of thing. So that was kind of what we're doing. Everybody thinks about that. And then you have, of course, on the other side, you have developers doing vibe coding that are doing large, kind of complex things with a lot of interconnected things. Imagine you're building code and it has to change one type of code line in there. It also has to understand where in the context of everything else is it doing this. And that's where I came up with the concept of vibe coding or vibe config, because now we're working beyond the scope, and I want to create a full configuration instead of just creating code. I'm now building something else. I'm outputting configuration data instead of outputting code data. So now we're looking into a different thing. And then it just dawned on me, well, it's not just vibe config. I can do this for anything. And I'll show that in a while. But the concept that we're doing here, right? Because we're working iteratively on this journey that we're doing. We're building up the context, and then we're asking it to kind of improve on that context and build more. So we're building up a large configuration or a setup. It can be customers. It could be the customer groups. You have to set up all of the different types of data that is related to that. And it's kind of self-evolving, because if you want to add to that, it will take all of this information that you built and put that into context when it wants to do a new thing. It's very contextual, because the only thing I want to do is not building on top of the entire web, because I want to pull in and I want to have a very narrow part of this. So we talked about the kind of quality of the session, how good is the context you can give it. So it's hyper contextual. And it's an agentic collaboration process, so it goes over a long period of time, but only for a specific use case. And this, imagine when you're working with let's say let me move on here. The standard chat sessions, right? So when you're working with a co-pilot, you have a process where you back and forth, and you have a single session, which is the context that you have. You can have that long running, and you can have a lot of things, but the output is always an answer. And this is normally how I see people work with agents, is they go in, they ask questions. They might have some type of information database in the back end, they might have some tooling, but the only thing is that it outputs something into the text box at the end, and then we copy that and we pull that over. And you can do that for an RFP. And then I started thinking, well, what if I kind of grow the scope of this? So the vibing concept is that we also provide context. And the output, the idea came when I looked at cowork from Anthropic. Anthropic had this aha moment as well, where they saw people are building different things in the code using their IDEs. So outputting everything here was not just code sessions, it was meal plans, and it was vacation plans, or it was anything else than just writing code. That is the context that we're talking about. So I just took that concept and said, I want to build the context of an ERP deployment. The tooling that I went, and this is where I kind of went beyond my standard tooling, because I also was kind of stuck in the mindset that Copilot Studio was going to be everything. I was really good at Copilot Studio, but I had to kind of challenge myself and go beyond that scope. So I went into Visual Studio Code. That is my preferred type of user experience right now. I'm also going over to Copilot GitHub now, GitHub Copilot, which is a kind of an evolving solution from this. But you see the output and information that I have. This is the context that we're working with. And you see, it's not code. It's actually what's called a markdown file. And everything that I'm building here is the context that I want to use to provide this. You also see a bunch of different CSV file, workers, bill of materials, resources, and all of these things. So this is the kind of the first iteration of this. It's the bicycle company that I figured out I want to try to build. And over here, you see all of the different sessions. And the benefit of all of these different sessions is they always will ground themselves in this information that I'm building. And every time I ask it a new question, it will create a new file, a markdown file, a CSV file, an HTML file to give me the visuals of this. And that's where I'm working. So this is kind of my loop where I'm working on sessions here. I'm building up this configuration. And then I can also connect to the MCP server or some type of Playwright automation where I want to deploy this into my environment. So if you look here, let me try and zoom in. If we see over here, we have all of my sessions. So these are basically where I want to build the test plan. I want to build the production processes. I want to set all these things up. And it's pretty easy to read through. This is actually the end-to-end test plan, what you want to do when you want to go through this. We want to create a vendor. What's the setup there? Then we look at the data entity workload assessment. It looks at all of the data that's been published here. And again, the context of all of these things that I've set up here. So I start off with a root folder in just a blank folder, and then I started building up these things. And the only thing you have to do is actually talk to your agent. It will do magical things. And one of the things that the benefit of using these IDEs is they have the ability to do terminal commands. It sounds kind of scary, and you should be a bit careful about it because it can do basically anything on your computer. But the benefit of the power of this is that it will build some type of code to execute some type of process. If you want to go in and you wanted to change a worker ID or the way the number sequences went, it will actually create a script that will run through all of these files and execute this for you instead of kind of pulling it into the agent and doing all these things. It is pretty strong when he wants to do this, and you can do a lot of things and a lot more than you can do just kind of fixate it only on working with these sessions and doing stuff in Copilot Studio. So what we also had then, let me just move forward. This is kind of my first configuration. But then I went on and expanded on the scope. I wanted to see how far can I take this. And so I had a company within the aquaculture industry that I was working with, and how far can I actually kind of start doing this. The first thing I did, I built a company RFP. So from scratch, I imagined this company, which was called Nordhav. I built the RFP, and then I responded to all of the requirements in this RFP using Dynamics. So imagine you're getting a large RFP in, and you have to answer every single question. The way that I kind of went about this before was that I went through every single question. I took that question, I put it into my Copilot, went into my Copilot, did the output, and then I copied that output into my spreadsheet, and then I had the answer for that question. At this point, I'm just pushing the entire RFP to the agent, and it's working through all of that in context. And sometimes when we're answering these RFPs or we're doing these questions, we forget the context of the different questions and how they relate to each other. The LLM actually was really great at doing this, so it understood all of the context. And out of that response, I responded to that, I started building the ERP configuration. So based on the information that I got from this company, it set up all of the different data types that I needed to do. So it created all of the data that I needed. And then it also ran through the MCP server. So I deployed everything into an actual ERP solution. So the next thing then was to test and validate this process. And when you do the test and validate, it also does a lot of the corrections, right? The experience when I set up these systems before was that when you got to the testing part, you figured out, oh, I forgot to set this parameter up here. I forgot to add this master data. I forgot to add these things. Maybe we should go in and set these things up. And when the results kind of deviate from the standard, the agents are really great at going back and kind of finishing up and cleaning up their own setup and mistakes in the system. And so when it's run through this actual test, the configuration is actually working at that point. And then I can run through multiple iterations to actually do these things. And now I had a complete deployed demo company from this envisioned solution. But this was only the fit scenario. And this is where also I got kind of interested in how far can I take this and how can I go beyond the scope of what this is. And so I was looking into the gaps because initially, I thought, oh, maybe I should be better at asking it so it will fit better with Dynamics because it had a bunch of different requirements that were not kind of core Dynamics fit. And I'll show you that afterwards. But the point of this is that I needed to close that gap, like lice counting that they do within this industry. We have some quality functions and maybe I can repurpose some of these things. But what I wanted to do was actually build something that is quite unique. Now, we have a different tool in our toolbox, also in the Power Platform with code apps. And so when we're already kind of in this context of all of this information, I can add to the context an application. So I told it to build a solution for me that kind of closed that gap. And so it started building out an actual application. And then I can also deploy the data layer here because it understood all of the context because it had the context of the actual requirements and the setup and the ERP configuration. And then it looked into that and said, well, we're missing some data types, so we need to add those. And of course, there were Dataverse tables. And I can also deploy them using the CLI for Power Platform. so I can actually get these things up and running. So, and this means that I can actually deploy a Power App really rapidly as well. So this opened up for me kind of the mindset of, well, we're not stuck in just using our ERP to solve the business processes. We can also build these Power Apps, and they are now not just the code app. No, sorry, they're not just a Canvas app or a model-driven app. We can actually now build code apps, which is full-blown .NET application, but we can host them as Power Apps using the code app architecture. The next thing I also went into was a bit of the automation stuff. So out of this, there were a lot of integrations. There were other things that we needed to do. So looking into the integrations, I actually mocked up a lot of the endpoints. So instead of connecting to third-party sources for the demo purposes, I just needed something to just view and how this actually worked. So I mocked up a couple of these integrations that would just give me mock data when I needed it. And then I defined the workflows, or it defined the workflows that it needed to be able to kind of pull this information or do some of these automation. And again, through the CLI, we were able to deploy these things also into production. And that's where I stopped, because I kind of got to a point where I did all of this for a demo that I had needed to do so I could do this. But I'm thinking I also started working on semantic models for Power BI, for Fabric, and you can also go into that domain, but it's still working on the same context that you have. And the great thing is that it's really, really good at understanding what you're doing. So what this resulted in, if you want to see this, and I'll take you a bit through kind of what the setup that I did. This is Nordhav. If you click the link here, you scan it, you'll get into it. And again, this is me just asking it to output something that is visually pleasing that I can consume. And what, again, these LLMs are really, really good at is deploying or building HTML pages. So beautiful web pages. They're fairly good at building PowerPoints, but you see them that kind of, you see when a PowerPoint is generated by Claude, because it's very similar. But on the web pages, the things that come out of it, and that's just getting better and better, is quite astonishing. So this is actually the web page, and I'm no web designer. But it did this. I even added this caveat that this is an AI example and everything is kind of just built for me using this. Let me see if I can get this in full screen. So this is the output of my exploration of this. It pulled up and built a lot of different pages. So here's the company presentation, customer requirements, solution architecture, a bunch of different things here. And then there's also a bit of reports from the execution that I did. So after it's doing all of this processing, it pulls out and creates a log. I told it to do that while it was working. And then I told it to build me an HTML page based on that information. And then I got all of this data or pages out. And I've just published them on GitHub. So let's just look at this. And this is just high level how it actually looks like. Let me sound as well. And because I also wanted to send this to a customer and I wanted them to kind of view this. And I have this guided tour. So I told it to build a narrator script to go through the page and build this guided tour. When I click this, it will actually start reading a presentation script that it's built to kind of run through this page. And I really love it. I just have to kind of show you what it does. So if I click this.
Welcome to the Nordhav Aquaculture Company presentation. Nordhav is a vertically integrated Atlantic salmon company headquartered in Bergen, Norway, founded in 2003 by 3 Norwegian fishing families. The company has grown from 3 initial seawater licenses to hold 28 licenses today, producing 52,000 tons gutted weight equivalent annually, with revenues of 4.2 billion Norwegian kroner. Over 2 decades, Nordhav has grown through disciplined acquisitions and infrastructure investment, starting with 3 licenses and...
I'll stop it there, but you get the point. So when you're looking at this page, do get to know the company about what it said. So look at all of this stuff that it actually produced, right? I told it to just envision something or add things for me. And you see it built like a complete timeline. There's revenue of different products built into the value chain. I also asked it to build like a visual representation of their supply chain and how their training is doing. Told it to how it actually figured out what people were working in the organization to create the HR records. And there's more information here. I love the legacy IT landscape because then it uses that in the context of the RFP. So there's a lot of information here that it just figured out or envisioned for me. Now, the next thing is, of course, the requirements that came out of this. So I told it first to build me a fictitious company, and then I told it to build the RFP for this company for an ERP. So there were 441 requirements across 7 domains. And if we go into those, there's aquaculture operation, which was not a very great fit. The technology and integration was good. Finance and accounting, of course, was really excellent. Processing in VAP, there's a good fit there as well. But there were some gaps. And you see that when you go into the different areas, there are 77 requirements. If you look into the solution answers, you can actually see how many things were actually covered by the different setup that's being done here. This is the finance and accounting stuff. If you go into the aquaculture and we look at the solution answer, there's a significant larger gap. And so you'll see it actually running through and imagining what all of these functionalities should be doing. So this is just the answers to the RFP. And yes, we can't do everything. But of course, with the platform, we can solve for any business process. So this is the architecture that it built out. And the initial part was just the 3 bottom layers here. So it had the F&O in the bottom. It had the Dataverse application platform on top of this with Power Automate flows and a couple of Dataverse tables that it wanted to do. And then it had Power BI as well on the top for the reporting and overview. And then I added a fourth layer from the agentic part. So after I've set all of these up, I just asked it, what else can we do from an agentic perspective? And then it built this very detailed kind of processing. And if you look into some of these areas here, and if you wanted to build these types of graphs, you tell it to build something called a mermaid chart. Mermaid charts is a specific type of chart that it does. If you ask it to build mermaid charts, it will build these beautiful visualizations for you inside the HTML. So there are some very specific things that it did, and you can see some of these agents. What's the purpose of this? What's the setup of this? And again, I can ask it to actually deploy these things into build an actual agent. So there are templates and there's also informations. One of my colleagues built a very good kind of harness to be able to deploy these things into Copilot Studio. And you see all of the setup for the automation stuff. Here's kind of an overview of how the end-to-end flow is going to be working. I'm just blown away. This is kind of one question and built all of these type of integrations right here. Right here's also a setup of how the hedging is going to be done, where it's getting all the data sources from, what's it going to do for the processing, and what the action and the outcome of this agent and what is it supposed to be doing. Pretty astonishing. And all of this is just done by asking the system to do this. Now, let me show you one area. If I go into the architecture here as well, and I'll go down, let me see, system architecture, all the way down to the bottom, there's an overview of this Aqua Monitor MDA. This is the application it built, and I also published this as an application. So once it kind of built all of the what's the processing, we don't have sea operations or lice treatment or fish health registries and stuff like that. Data that's probably not going to be in the ERP, but it's contextual and it has to be there because that's a part of their core operations. Now, if I open up this mock application, this is what it actually built. So if you look at the lice management, you can go in and you can add new accounts and you can change this up however you want. The great thing about this is that when it mocks up the data, you can still interact with it, but every time you exit out the application, it will just reset. So it's great for building demos. So what you need to do to just put this into production now would be to actually pull this out, build an actual database, pull that into the solution. I love working on the mock data. I do a lot of demos, so it's very convenient for me. So if I delete something here, it will delete it from this, but next time I load it, it will actually be refreshed. Now, what kind of surprised me was if you look into this, let's do there should be some type of boat harvest planning. Right, this is where I got a bit surprised, because if you see the release to D365, it actually takes this information here and then builds an automation flow inside of Power Platform that pulls the data that you register in Dataverse and then creates journals and setup inside of F&O. And so there's a lot to this application, actually. If you see the architecture, it has also suggested X++ extensions. So some areas we needed to add some coding, and it actually built all of this for me as well. Now the next thing was just to kind of deploy it. I didn't have the access to that. There's an integration map. There's Power Automate flows that needs to be set up to do this. And then if you look at the ERD and the setup of this custom application, all of this is now actually being kind of visually presented to me. I'd also built this integration graph. Now go in and have a look at all of these things, because again, it's just contextualized for this single type of demo use case that I had. So that's Nordhav. Now there's a lot more information here as well. I do want to show some of the other things here. Let me go back to the first web page here, and look at some of the things that it's doing when it's doing the rollouts. So here's the end-to-end test results. Right, it ran through 40 different steps, which is kind of complex. It built an execution plan, and then I just had it run it. It's using the MCP server to actually execute this, and then it gives me back an actual report. Here's a material flow. Let me see if I can zoom in, from source to pay. So it has 2 different vendors that it buys from. It goes through a harvest simulation. It then produces all of these things and then sells it off to a customer. It even was nice enough to build me a print the report here. Now, one of the things that it's doing, and if you go all the way down and we look at the issues, these are all the things that while it was running through the process, actually figured out, I need to go back and I need to set these things up. So when I hit a snag or I hit some type of complexity, it did a learning cycle where it actually teaches itself to not do the same thing again in a later run through. So this is kind of how does it do the packing slip? Of course, when we do the packing slip, we know that we have to change it to all. It's normally on the packing list and all of these things. There's no documentation on this, but it's kind of inherent information that we know when we're working with the system. Another thing that was really complex was the cost of goods. So you see the core setup was set up one way, but when it ran through and it looked at the accounting posting that it did, kind of teaching itself how to do this, it actually figured out that I had the wrong setup on one of the inventory model groups. And so it actually changed these things down. Now we're down into areas where even I, as a consultant, right, I've been working for this for many years, I don't know the financial domain that well or the specific. So this is deep financial knowledge and also deep industry knowledge, because this is the best practice for this. It's just amazing to see these things kind of come to life when you're doing these things. If you go into the TCO, again, here is to start the tour. And one of the things I had to kind of argue with it was, how do we get from the traditional implementation? Because it's very kind of locked in mindset into this. But when I kind of started working back and forth and talked to it, now we're doing all of this agentic stuff. It's pretty funny when it does this implementation. It says, oh, we're going to do this in 3 weeks. And then it runs through this process and it's, I'm done, right? So it takes less than an hour to actually execute all of the things that it planned for the next 3 weeks. Kind of astonishing. So what we're looking at here is kind of the starting grounds. I haven't done this in production. I have a couple of projects coming up where I'm going to assist partners in doing these things. And if you want to have some information about this, please reach out to me and I'll tell you all about these projects. But this is where I kind of didn't meet any type of threshold where I got to a point where I can't go further or beyond these things. And so when you do, even if it has processes where it's testing outside of the MCP server, I'm using the Playwright plugins. So there's an MCP server session that you can install locally inside your computer as well. It will use that to launch a browser, and then it will go in and it will work with the functionality. So if anything that it doesn't do through the MCP server, even if I have to go in through, let's say running through a test script on a Dataverse application, it can actually go through and do that by using a click-through using Playwright. So there's no scenario where I felt that, oh, I've met a wall, or it can't do some type of automation process, or it doesn't reach it. It increases, of course, the complexity, and there's token costs to all of this. I understand that people actually have budgets to do these things. I'm lucky enough to work in a company where this isn't a problem, So I'm happy to kind of be the forerunner of this and spending a lot of tokens at Microsoft has to show you the possibility of these things actually being possible to execute. So That's the point of the NordHav setup. All right, moving on to another thing that I did, and this is kind of where I got this templating idea from. So everything I've done up to now was just reusing and starting from scratch. I reused some of the elements, and I kind of referenced them when I did it, so I could copy and point to something information, or I can paste a screenshot or do these things. And that was kind of how I went about it, always starting from scratch. But then there's a new thing that came in while I was doing this, because there's always new things happening in the AI stuff, AI world. And one of them is skills. And skills is kind of a concept that was primarily added to the domain of anthropic models to be able to perform some type of repeatable action, or didn't have to kind of specify everything. So skill is kind of reusable prompts that you can use in the context of the work that you're doing. Every time you have a new system message, it will kind of infuse that skill to say that I also know how to do these things. So instead of building these large prompts, you're not going to do very shallow prompts, but the knowledge of what you want to achieve can be properly stored in these skills. There's some really great videos online that explain skills, so I'm not going to go deep into it, but just think of these as kind of reusable components that you can introduce into your context to be able to do more things with it. And these are also reusable when it comes to co-work, or when you're working with things like Scout. Skills become a very kind of crucial part of using there to be able to reuse it. You don't start off from scratch, but you have at least some type of context or possibility or predetermined way that you want your agent to act in these processes. Another thing that I did, and I went through and I asked my agent to distill information from Microsoft Learn. There's an MCP server for Microsoft Learn, which I use when I do RFPs. I don't use the distilled knowledge now because it can get stale because there's so much happening on the product. So if you want a new functionality, you can ask this MCP server in real time. But I wanted for the setup and the configuration, there's some generic things that don't change that rapidly. And so I wanted to just distill an understanding of how all of the modules were working. So what I did, I asked the agent to explain to me the capabilities of Dynamics 365. And then I told it to build a skill or a capability for each of the individual modules within that solution. And then it went out, it kind of interrogated Microsoft Learn, and then it built a markdown file to explain how all of this functionality is working inside of the solution, to just have, so it didn't have to go do that type of querying every time it had to do that. So that is data or knowledge that I added to the context. I also took, so when we look into the data migration framework, the data structure of F&O is that there's 18,000 plus tables inside of the solution. So it's very normalized, it's very complex. And we want to import or build data types to be able to import it. There's the data migration framework, and it's really good because we have some templates in there which are built to be able to kind of rapidly do some type of module configuration. And so it has all of the most, not all, but most of the data types that you need. So I took those data migration frameworks and I exported all of these. I took the data that's output there and then I inputted that into the context, and I told it to kind of compose an understanding of the data model inside of F&O using this. And out of that came an understanding of what the data types that I needed to do. So when I now produce a setup configuration, it has an understanding of what the data types and entities. And I also took the OData outputs. I copied all of that, the long XML where it just lists all of the OData types. And then I told it to map these things. And it's kind of weird because the setup in the DMF is singular, while the setup or the naming convention of the OData are plural. And then I made it actually do this type of mapping, which means that when it's doing the OData push using the new OData templates, using the MCP server. So when you do the data type setup there, it uses the OData definition, but now I have the DMF that understands the sequence of how this needs to be imported. So that's kind of rerouted, and I taught it to be able to do that action using the DMF templates. And then I took the business process library, and then I asked it to build business process library template that I was going to be using when I wanted to do the configuration. So this is kind of the bit of the pre-work that I did to be able to build a harness. And a harness is a good concept that you need to know, because a harness is just explaining everything that you, or building a configuration setup in a pre-state of an agent, basically, that you can then use again and again to solve some type of problem. So if you look into AI harnesses and how these are building, you can ask your agent to build a new AI harness. I've done this as well for myself, for my private setup. I have a way of going in and doing my financial advising and some other things. I built my own type of private harness to do this. This harness that I built here is also available, by the way. The F&O harness. This is my Vibe Config starter kit. I did publish it. I stuck it to my LinkedIn profile as well. And you can go in and you can open this up. And there's an index HTML, which kind of explains everything, but it shows you what's the process of doing this. And the goal of this harness and the setup of the Vibe config is take a requirement, and it can be any type of requirement. Just take an RFP requirement or anything that you have. It could be a setup of a solution that you need to do. It could be an existing migration action that you want to do just to kind of rapidly build a configuration. It takes all of that and then it decomposes everything. So it kind of looks at all of this information in the context of the data that I have in here. It builds the modules and it fans out how should all of these modules be done. And then it builds out the models there, and it has a step where it actually then executes or a gated action where it comes back to you and says, oh, I've done all the configuration setup. Are we ready to deploy it? Where you can actually go through and validate this inside of the harness. You can go through and click through all of the setup files and see if you're happy with it before you actually push it out to the system. And the last step is, of course, testing and running a test phase for this as well. So that is kind of what vibing is. You be able to kind of iteratively go through this process. I think the process has to be done in an IDE. So it changed the mindset for me when I wanted to just be doing stuff, because it was really shallow, the things that I was doing with it, just chatting with the information, building a Copilot Studio agent where I just simply went in and yeah, it's really cool to do a customer demo where how many open customer orders are there in the system? It's a cool demo, but it doesn't bring any business value. I think this journey that I've been on here really can rapidly bring some type of business value, configuring a system, setting up some type of agents. Now, the difference between agents as well, I mean, the thing that kind of got stuck in my head was this repeatable scenario that you're working with agents, because I think a lot of people would, oh, we're going to do a deployment agent. Let's build an agent that can do ERP deployment. But the scope of it is so unique every time you want to do it. It's so complex that what we end up with is just going into these agents and we get stuck in this loop where we're trying to change the system prompts or the setup of this prompt and the instruction sets or the tooling, and you get stuck in this process all the time. The vibing stuff gives you the ability to do this on a much greater scale and much greater capacity and complexity, because you're now iteratively working on this on a longer kind of state by state, moving towards the goal where you have a configured solution. And this is where I think we're kind of failing in the mindset of just, oh, let's build an agent that can do magical stuff, to let's use the agentic capabilities to get to this goal. Now, there's a new kid or type in town where it kind of fits in the middle of these two things. So you have the agents that are really good at doing very known processes using say creating a finance journal at the end of the month, or following up with a vendor on an RFP, or doing these things. It's really good at doing that. And then you have the other part where it's like configure an entire ERP. Now, there are things in the middle where you kind of get business scenarios that are not a part of the kind of the standard flow of how things operate. And this is where co-work comes into the picture. So co-work is kind of a single session where you want to do a simple task, but it can be complex in nature. And one of the areas that I have here where I kind of challenged co-work to do some fancy stuff was, I first asked my Copilot Studio agent inside of Excel to build me an example of a general journal. And it made me this very nice chart right here. Then I went into co-work and I told it to again, just showing kind of how integrated this is with WorkIQ, because I just went into Excel, I did this one thing, and then I told Cowork to find the financial journal example I just built and then publish that to my ERP. Of course, to do this, I added the ERP Dynamics 365 plugin that's in Cowork. And so it started kind of decomposing it. It looked into WorkIQ, found the information that it needed to do, and then it looked through and set up these things. Now it found a discrepancy because my configuration has 6 digits, while the template that I built only had 4. And so it asked me, do you want me to just use these things so it can input the journal, or do you want me to map them through the ERP accounts? Now this is where we're actually using some AI. If I just wanted to import it, I wouldn't use an agent, because then it's a deterministic process. And I see a lot of people also replacing very good, solid deterministic processes. Well, let's agentify it. But what you're doing then is just taking old processes and then making them more expensive. That's basically what you're doing. So you have to find some areas where there actually value, and you're using the non-deterministic capabilities. And it can be in some of these processes right here, because the chart of accounts that comes into this might be very different each and every time. So I wanted to map this in, and this is where the non-deterministic capabilities is really, really good. So it mapped through the ERP accounts. That was the next question that it gave me. Now, if you see here, what it comes out and figures out is this mapping, right? So they're named totally different. They have a similar domain, but the domain knowledge is accounting. And I think a lot of this is a typical question where you can't deterministically build something, because then you have to have all of these different things mapped out. But this is where the AI is really, really great at doing some of the heavy lifting. This is cognitive work being done for you. Now, one of the things that I really, really liked was that, yes, it mapped all of these things in, but so the setup of these accounts, and I don't know the financial domain, basically. I'm an operations guy, so this is far beyond what I was normally able to do. But I understand that there normally is, when we do these type of journals, there are accounts that you're not allowed to post to. So what it did is that it found alternative accounts. I don't know if this is the right thing, but probably someone who knows the domain of accounting should be able to validate this, that this is the kind of a fair alternative to be able to do this, because it still wanted to kind of post these things in. And so this is where also added cognitive, not just mapping it out, but understanding that when I mapped it to this account, it didn't work posting. So imagine all of the validation that it has to do these things. And I haven't given it a single skill. I haven't given it any type of added instructions, but it was able to do these things. The next thing that it did after that was go in and create my journal. And another thing that is in the system, so if you look at this, it's very different from the beginning and starting point, because the posting setup that we do in F&O is kind of not a debit credit, because the other one had debit credit, debit credit, debit credit, but we have an offset account posting. So it actually transformed the entire thing into the right format inside of my ERP system as well. And again, another kind of complexity and cognitive skill that it had to be doing. And then, of course, when I have all of these things in, it's done all of the heavy working for me, I can just ask it to post the journal. And because we do have, and this is where our MCP differs. Normally, if you look into all of the other MCP server, even the Business Central or the Dataverse MCP server, they're really good at doing CRUD operations on the data sources. And you can read and write to the data sources. But in many cases, you have to, especially in the ERP domain, it's kind of a multi-layered posting method that goes through. Yes, we create the journals, but then we have to execute something that runs through some type of complex business logic based on that journal. And with the MCP server that we have kind of an unlimited ability to go in through and call all of these. This is where the 500,000 plus action comes into picture, because now we have the ability to do anything like this. Normally, with a standard MCP server that's out there, you would have to create that single kind of action and be able to publish that through the MCP server. But through the generic nature of the way that we're doing it, we're able to do this. And this is where our MCP server really differentiates. And this is the power, right? So think about all of these different areas that we have now, right? We have co-pilots to do the things that we're working with. So we can go in and we can do co-pilots, we can extract and we can work with our information. That's the right thing if you want to do work with your M365 or Work IQ. It is far beyond greater than any of the other LLMs in the market. If you want to work with M365, Work IQ is just mind-blowing at this moment. It's so much better. The agents that we're building for repeatable tasks, but a single kind of narrow scope, that's really great as well. We have that capability. We have co-work to do the things that go outside of the confines of a standard process that we need to do. And now we also have Scout, which is kind of an IDE, but it's running locally. And a Scout is basically what's called a claw or an open claw clone, and it works locally on your computer. It has access to all of this power that you get when you get access to terminal access, and you can do all of these things there. It's very, very powerful. So Scout is kind of another in-between between co-work and the IDE. But then we have the IDE, which is great for doing these really, really complex, long-running, super large contextual thing that you can't load everything into the AI model. The context window will limit you in what you can load in. But if you have the ability to pull on the limited context when you want to execute these things, an IDE becomes a really, really powerful tool to that. So that is the scope of everything that I wanted to talk about today. I think I'm at the top of the 50th mark here to be able to do this. And I'm open for questions. So, Beau and Bobby, did you learn anything?
I mean, this was a great tie-in. If you'd been with us for the last 17 hours, Fredrik, we learned a lot about Scout, about the human aspect of what's going on, and where we should be. So really just, I mean, for me, it's a bit awesome seeing all of it put together because it's hammering home. Like I'm excited to get out and implement some of the stuff I've learned over the course of this time. And so, yeah, I'm super excited about a lot of the technology that I just haven't, I'm just scratching at that I really can put into better use after seeing so many good examples.
Fredrik, you kind of talked about something that I'm going to steal with your permission. Taking old processes and adding AI is just making them more expensive. It's like such a chef's kiss way to explain to some of these executives that are just like, I need AI. And they're unwilling to talk about like a true change management and adoption kind of journey, right? And to what Bobby talked about, we had another session earlier in the day talking about, hey, try to envision this process as if AI existed when you're making the process, not how do I automate some of this process? How do I change this entire business process? And you nailed it too in your keynote. You were talking about the same exact kind of concepts. We're beating this same drum in this, and it's just happenstance in this conference, almost like essentially with zero prompts to everybody that's talking. And it's just kind of a fascinating thing to me that we're all kind of saying the same thing without, having this, hey, make sure we're mentioning this kind of thing. And a lot of people talked about human in the loop. A lot of people are talking about, these same kind of concepts that are, I would categorize as the next era, the next, wave of this revolution that AI is bringing. So, Fredrik, you nailed this. You grabbed the early hour, I think. Technically, I think it's like 6 a.m. your time.
It is.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks again. I think the last time we were going back and forth on email, you're just coming back from vacation. So hopefully vacation was awesome. I was a little late joining this hour because I was closing up the last hour, but thanks again for having us. I don't know who else, if anybody had any other questions in the chat, but
we've got time. If you have,
we've got
I didn't
time.
see questions in the chat, but we've got time for them. I want to just double click the idea of not just applying AI just because it's AI. Alex mentioned the same thing that you were talking about, Fred. There's some things that just don't deserve AI. They're fine on their own as a workflow or as a human action because it's a one-time thing, or it's like just because you got AI, you don't want to just arbitrarily put it in place because you want to have AI. Donna mentioned it. We're just, people are so excited to do AI. And I love the way she put that, because it just is so. It's like I want to be on the interwebs and do AI. That you're not taking the time to be intentional about it. And so I love the consistent talk about, hey, this is an intentional choice. Why are we doing this? How are we framing AI and Copilot into our business and organization? So, Rachel.
I'm going to bite, and I'm going to ask a question of my colleague, Fredrik, which is maybe a great segue into the next presentation, which is mine. But like, Fredrik, do you have like a personal like go-to or favorite from the tools? And I know that all the tools are different, and you've done a great job of explaining, I think, like what the tools are good for. But do you kind of have one that is like your favorite or your go-to, and like,
the new thing that I'm doing now.
I'm gonna drop like my preference and my favorite and why I chose that favorite. So like, do you have one that you gravitate towards and that you kind of like a little bit better than others? And if so, why?
It depends on what I'm doing right now. Right? I've been into the IDE stuff. My mantra now is kind of replacing my have you tried turning it on and off again, to have you actually ask the agent the question, because sometimes I get a question where the agent, go ask it if you can do that, and then thinking maybe a bit meta on it. So asking the agent on how you're supposed to ask the agent, on how you're supposed to use the agent, on how you're supposed to do something. That kind of meta layer is very important. But I want to highlight one thing that I'm doing now, which I really love. If you go into Copilot and you ask it to kind of extrapolate information about a domain. So first ask it an information about, it could be about a customer, or it could be about a use case, or it could be about just the technology questions, like how does warehouse management in Dynamics ERP work? You take that, and then you ask it, the next question is, build me an infographic. The infographic being the kind of keyword, same with mermaid charts and other things, but build me an infographic image based on this. It will build you a very nice logical overview in an image that gives you kind of all of the things that's written in long form text into a singular image, which is then really, really nice to understand a domain or topic. So and you see it, I've seen it kind of trending on LinkedIn as well. You see these infographics coming up. But I'm doing that to explain technology, and I'm using that a lot to especially go deep on the industry context in some of the customer areas, because I think we're lacking that industry depth also with the great kind of business process catalog. That's really good. But if you want to go in and say, how do we solve for fish farming industries, and how would you be able to do that? You can get these really, really nice images. I'm almost going to see if I can show you one of this one, and it's a customer case like this one. Like, what is it for seafood processing? What is important for the domain? What areas do we support in this domain? This is just an infographic where I built it out for a customer that I did a presentation for. But it's highlighting that ability to go deep and contextualize information, show it in a different way. So yeah, infographics inside of Copilot, useful, very, very useful.
I love that idea. Your idea of instead of responding to a normal RFP, also to respond with, hey, click this URL, is chef's kiss. That's I'm interested to bring that back.
It came up before RFPs. I mean, I think it's a game changer. I worked in the public sector with a partner for a number of years, and that was the bane. I mean, having to deal with RFPs, they're so arbitrary and bloated for no reason, that if you could use AI and use Copilot and all the tools we have to simplify this process, not just, I mean, for the partner, but for the customer. I was trying to help the customer. They were going through the process of basically, a fit gap analysis like 3 times. You got to create the RFP. If you're doing it properly, you're going to go through kind of a fit gap with your team. Then you're going to do it with your partner, and maybe the RFP administrator, and so there's like this like triple the work for your internal teams at an organization if you do this RFP process improperly. So cutting that down into this shorter time period and being very specific about what you want, as opposed to literally 8,000 questions that may not pertain to what you want to do in your organization, was insane to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and another thing is just finalizing that. I think I see also a lot of people posting, you have to figure out your data before you start with AI. No, you have to start with AI to fix your data, or tap into the potential that you have, and then explain to you where the discrepancy in your data is, and then enrich that. So you have to start with AI. Don't start with perfect data, because if you don't have perfect data, you're never going to get perfect data. You start off with using AI to harness that capabilities and pull in all of that information. So that's another thing. Don't wait to start with this thing until you have the perfect setup or the perfect domain or the perfect process. You can use it to explain your processes and see where the gaps are, and especially in the sense that Beau talked about, this in like mind-changing things that you have, because I've seen also demos being done now. Look at this. Here's an SAP demo, for instance, where we go in and we do master, like a replenishment order. Like, yeah, but we have master planning to do this. You don't have to use AI, very expensive way, to just check your inventory, check your demands, and then build these things. Same thing with some of the repeatable processes that we have inside of Cowork now. I see a lot of people using Cowork to build a dashboard that is repeatable, like the financial reports that you normally would have. Now we're going to use Cowork to do this? No, because we're kind of stuck in these mindset, the old process that we need to do. You still need to do deterministic process. You still need to build a Power BI report or build a Power Automate flow. You will still do these things, because kind of we get fixated on AI-ifying these things that shouldn't be changed. It's still going to be, it's just going to be more expensive. So yeah, change your mindset. I think that's the core part of this. And yeah.
Cool. Very well said.
Fredrik, that was awesome, man. And we're excited to have you on with us. Thank you for getting up early. I know he said he was working to get up earlier anyway. He's making some lifestyle. He's going to be getting up at Bobby hours at 5 a.m, starting now.
So you're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.